Isabella and Ferdinand, Cologne was standing outside on January the 2nd waiting for some money so he could make this voyage over here in October. Now, with that, the Europeans had been so devastated psychologically by the overwhelming brilliance of the Moorish Empire, which was 80% African and 20% Arabs, and the Arabs were mixed. They were so overwhelmed by it that they were now in an identity crisis and were seeking to find an identity for themselves. And that's when they began to commission works. That's where, what pope was that? Pope Leo, was it? That commissioned, or was it Pope Julian? It's either Leo or Julian, I get them mixed up here, who commissioned Michelangelo to paint his aunt, uncle, and cousins as the first family. And that was the beginning of the European imagery, Eurocentric imagery, of putting what had been known throughout the history even of the European church, that these were Africoid people, that these were black people, and now began to put this imagery in the context of white supremacy. And they put it into those churches, and that was the beginning of the spread of the imagery of white people as the founders and promulgators of the original movement founded by Jesus, which came to be known as Christianity.
I have several questions to ask you, but I just went and saw that Ethiopian Zion, which is a display of religious art supposedly coming out of Ethiopia. And the majority of that art is of a European Byzantine depiction of Jesus the Christ, and it's very confusing for our people because they're hurting our children that to see this. And in the history, the outline of history, they're taking the Ethiopian Empire of Axum back to around 30 AD, somewhere around there. So people say, well, these are Ethiopians. They are some of the oldest Christians. And if they're painting Jesus white, surely they must have known what he's doing.
They're the oldest Christians, because that's where the Christian church developed in Africa. But the point that it must be remembered, when they called on the Byzantines emperor to help them fight against the incursion of the Arabs, when they called on, they had to pay a price for that. They called on this man to bring his army in, and that's when the influence of the Byzantine art and the Byzantine Empire was exerted upon the Ethiopians. But their oldest icon, their oldest images, the further you go back, you will find them to be more Africoid. But as you get on till about the 6th, 7th century, as you start coming up in there, you will see this Byzantine influence, and you will see these mixed people largely there. So that's how that came about.
Let me go back to the religion that Jesus is supposed to have. Let's talk about that for a while. I want to start with Abraham. What religion did Abraham have when he became a Hebrew? Even to the time that he went into Egypt, was it a one God-centered religion, or did he essentially come out of Egypt with that one God concept and all of the other essence that later became Christianity?
Okay, what has made it so confusing for people is that Africans generally always had a one God concept. I don't like the term God because the word spelled backwards, but I'm using it out of convenience now. As Willis Budge says in the book, what he calls Egyptian Book of the Dead, actually it's the book of coming forth by day or by night. In his translation of it, he begins in his introduction to state that these people in Kemet practiced essentially what was a polytheistic monotheism. And what does that mean? They believed in the one, for whom they never built a temple. They never had the audacity to say that they could fit it in the temple. They never said they had all the knowledge of it between the pages of their books. Now, Christianity claims that, Islam claims that, other religions claim it. They were so in awe of it, they said, you cannot understand this one which they saw as the divine intelligence, the permeator of everything in the universe, called the Netanu. But you can see so many manifestations of this force in the different deities which Europeans call gods and goddesses. They were just different aspects of the one. Now this was generally common among African people throughout that region. Now mother reverence was the strongest religious system in the world at that time. And the maternal aspect of the Creator was emphasized because of the role of the black woman, the significant, very significant role, overwhelmingly significant role of the black woman in the creation of civilization. So that existed in Canaan. But the Hebrews somehow became more patriarchal, or the priests did. The prophets, became more patriarchal, and there was a constant struggle between the prophets and the priests, because the priests leaned towards the mother goddess religions, and the prophets wanted to put the emphasis on the father. So there was always that struggle, and that's why the prophets were so vehement in all of the venom that they wrote about the mother goddess religion, and accused them of doing all kind of ugly things, which they did not do essentially in their practices. Now, Abraham, in all probability, because the prophets had not really grown, there were no prophets in Israel in that time, there was no Israel. Abraham, the first Harabu, or Hebrew as we call it, was following the religion that everybody else was following at that time, which was the mother goddess religion. They were all, and they had many manifestations of the one divine force in the universe. They didn't have many gods, they just had many manifestations of that force. Now, when he came, we don't even know if Abraham even had any understanding about a one God concept as we think of it today. They say he had that understanding, but that understanding was only made clear in the days of Moses. And Moses was merely carrying on that which he had been taught in the school of philosophy that he studied while he was in Kemet, which was the school of Atan, founded by Akhenaten, in the days of Akhenaten, who they say was the inaugurator of monotheism. It is not true. He just had another name that he gave to the sun. The Kemetans, the intelligent Kemetans, did not believe that the sun was God or the Creator, but that it was the most visible manifestation of the God force for the solar system. That was scientific. I mean, when the sun goes out, God and everything goes out for you, because the sun is the regulator of everything here. So they saw the provision for this planet and the solar system of the Creator, of what we must name a God, through the sun. And they called it Amun-Ra. And the priest of Amun-Ra was so strong for so many centuries, and therefore they controlled the government. They controlled the pharaohs, and the pharaohs had to come through them. But when Akhenaten comes along, he was going to buck all this, and this is over several thousand years old, and come up with another name, and still the sun now, as its central symbol, and call it Atan. And he's trying to reverse a political order. And the priests of Amun are too strong for him to do this. But he is not the inaugurator of monotheism. Moses obviously followed in that school. Dr. Ben, to use his words, he said, what happened between Moses and Ramses II during the 19th dynasty of Kemet? Moses being raised as a brother of Ramses II, being raised, according to the biblical story, by the Pharaoh Seti I, jet black man. His daughter's jet black. His son, Ramses II, is jet black with kinky hair. So Moses is raised as a son, and which gives you another indication that he's a black man. Dr. Ben said what happened, to use his words, two niggas fell out over God. Ramses II said Amun-Ra. Moses came up with this thing about El Shaddai, the Lord of the mountain. So they got in a struggle over that. Now, whether Moses was asked to leave, whether Moses was put out, this whole story about Moses going